Get that woman on her knees now. Lieutenant Rick Danner's voice exploded across the quiet suburban street as red and blue lights flooded Naomi Brooks's small white house. 30 officers surrounded the property. Rifles stayed lowered, but every flashlight pointed straight at her front door like she was already guilty. Neighbors stood on lawns in robes and jackets, phones raised high. Someone whispered, "I knew something was wrong with her." The front door creaked open. Naomi stepped outside slowly. 52 years old. African American. Deep brown skin washed pale under police lights. Gray curls tied back low. Faded sweater. Loose house pants. One trembling hand gripping the edge of the door. The other holding a small metal lockbox against her chest. "Hands where I can see them." Danner barked. "You are obstructing an active investigation." Naomi raised one hand carefully. "I asked for the warrant twice already." Danner laughed hard enough for the crowd to hear. "You think this is television?" A few neighbors chuckled quietly. A teenage boy across the street filmed everything. Naomi looked directly at the officers surrounding her yard. "Calm. Too calm. Your perimeter is violating residential clearance protocol," she said softly. One younger officer frowned. Danner stepped closer immediately. "Listen to her," he sneered. 3 hours on the internet and suddenly she is a lawyer. The crowd laughed louder this time. Naomi did not react. She tightened her grip on the lockbox instead. A bright spotlight from a police SUV hit her face. She blinked but stayed standing straight. "Ma'am," Officer Elena Ruiz said carefully from behind the line, "maybe just place the box down." Danner cut her off instantly. "No. She keeps it visible. If she runs, take her down." Naomi looked at Ruiz instead of Danner. "Your body cam is not synced." Ruiz froze. Her hand moved instinctively toward the blinking camera on her chest. Danner noticed it too. His eyes narrowed. "Enough." He pointed at Naomi. "You refused police access. You ignored orders. You triggered a neighborhood threat response." Naomi's voice stayed low. 30 officers for a widow living alone. Silence rolled across the street for half a second. Then Danner stepped right into her space. "People like you always say that after we catch you." Naomi's jaw tightened slightly. Not anger. Pain. Behind her through the open doorway sat a tiny living room. Old books. A folded blanket. Prescription bottles near the kitchen sink. An old framed photo turned face down on the shelf. Nothing dangerous. Nothing threatening. But the crowd already believed the uniforms. A local news van pulled onto the corner. The cameraman jumped out immediately. Danner smiled when he saw them. "Perfect timing," he muttered. Naomi noticed the camera too. Her shoulders lowered slightly. Not fear. Exhaustion. "Please," she said quietly. "My nephew is asleep upstairs." Danner's expression hardened even more. "Then maybe you should have thought about that before becoming a problem." Another officer moved toward the porch. Naomi stepped sideways instantly. Fast. Controlled. Not panicked. "Do not enter without verbal confirmation of scope," she said sharply. The officer stopped on instinct before even realizing why. Ruiz looked at Naomi again. Longer this time. "Lieutenant," Ruiz started carefully. "She knows operational wording." Danner spun toward her. "Do not embarrass yourself, Ruiz." Phones kept recording. One woman near the sidewalk whispered, "She sounds military." Danner heard that too. His face darkened immediately. "Military?" he snapped. "Look at her house." The humiliation landed hard. Naomi lowered her eyes for the first time. Just briefly. The porch light shook slightly in the wind. The metal lockbox slipped against her arm, and something small fell onto the wooden steps with a sharp metallic click. Ruiz looked down first. A heavy bronze coin spun in a circle beneath the police lights. Pentagon seal. Eagle crest. Strange engraved lettering around the edge. Ruiz bent slightly, confused. Danner kicked the coin hard before she could touch it. It disappeared under the porch bench. Cheap fake, he said instantly. People buy those online every day. Naomi's hand trembled for the first time. Do not touch that. Danner smiled coldly. Or what? A silence settled over the yard again. Naomi stared at him with tired eyes. You still have time to walk away from this. Some neighbors laughed nervously. Others stopped filming for a moment. Danner leaned closer until they were almost face to face. You are in no position to threaten anybody. Then he grabbed the lockbox from her arms. Naomi stumbled one step forward. Careful, she shouted before stopping herself. Danner caught the reaction instantly. There it is, he said quietly. That box matters. He turned toward the officers. Open it. Naomi's face changed for the first time all night. Real fear. Ruiz hesitated. Lieutenant, maybe we should wait for authorization, open the damn box. Ruiz took it reluctantly. The entire street watched in silence now. Even the news cameraman stopped moving. Ruiz pressed the latch slowly. Inside sat an old burned access card attached to a black lanyard. Half the lettering was destroyed by heat. But one word remained visible beneath the cracked plastic. Pentagon. Ruiz inhaled sharply. Danner's smile disappeared for half a second before returning even harder. Coincidence, he snapped too quickly. Naomi stared directly at the access card. Not at the officers. Not at the cameras. The distant sound of a secure encrypted ringtone suddenly echoed from somewhere inside the house. Every officer on the porch looked toward the dark hallway at the same exact moment. The encrypted ringtone kept echoing from the dark hallway while 30 officers stood frozen on Naomi Brooks's porch. Nobody moved first. Not even Lieutenant Rick Danner. The flashing police lights painted red across the old family photos inside the house. Naomi's breathing stayed controlled, but her fingers tightened around the edge of her sweater hard enough to wrinkle the fabric. Across the street, neighbors still filmed through glowing phone screens. One woman whispered, "Why would someone like her have Pentagon access?" Danner snapped immediately. Because criminals steal things. The ringtone stopped. Silence rushed back in harder this time. Officer Elena Ruiz looked toward the hallway again. Lieutenant, secure devices like that usually require biometric confirmation. Danner turned on her fast. You want to lose your badge tonight too? Naomi lowered her eyes for a moment. Tired. Not defeated. Just tired in a way that looked older than 52. The porch light buzzed softly above her. Her nephew Marcus stood halfway down the upstairs staircase inside the house, clutching a blanket against his chest. 16 years old. Thin. Frightened. Aunt Naomi, he whispered. Danner spotted him instantly. Good. Another witness. Naomi stepped toward the doorway protectively. He stays out of this. Then answer the questions. You never asked the right ones. Danner smiled coldly. You think you are smarter than 30 cops? Naomi did not answer. Ruiz noticed something instead. On the hallway table beside the ringing phone sat several prescription bottles, overdue utility notices, and a carefully folded military burial flag inside a glass frame. Her expression shifted slightly. The house did not feel dangerous anymore. It felt heavy. Lived in. Hurt. A few hours earlier, before the sirens came, Naomi had been sitting alone at the kitchen table under a dim yellow light. Heating canned soup slowly. Writing numbers into a worn black notebook. Hospital bills. Mortgage warnings. Marcus's school expenses. Her glasses rested low on her nose while an old jazz record played softly in the background. Beside her notebook sat the burned Pentagon access card and a faded photograph of a younger Naomi standing beside two men in formal military uniforms. The faces were partly hidden by smoke damage. Naomi traced one face gently with her thumb before sliding the photo away when Marcus walked in. "You still awake?" he asked quietly. Naomi smiled the way tired people do when they do not want children to worry. "Bills do not sleep." Marcus looked at the burned card. "You should tell them one day." Naomi shook her head immediately. "Some doors stay closed for a reason." Back on the porch, Danner grabbed the lockbox from Ruiz and snapped it shut again. "Enough drama." He pointed toward the squad cars. "Search warrant goes forward." Naomi's voice sharpened instantly. "Your warrant scope does not cover digital seizure." Ruiz looked at her again. Another strange detail. Another exact phrase. Danner noticed the look between them. "She memorized legal phrases online," he barked. "That does not make her important." But his voice cracked slightly at the end. A neighbor nearby lowered her phone slowly. The confidence in the street had started to shift. Tiny. Almost invisible. Marcus suddenly stepped down another stair. "She told you the truth." Naomi turned sharply. "Marcus." But the boy kept going. "She always tells the truth." Danner laughed. "Kid, your aunt is hiding something federal." Marcus swallowed hard. "Yeah," he said softly. "Something federal saved my life." Silence. Even the officers looked at him now. Naomi closed her eyes briefly. Pain crossed her face like an old scar reopening. If you have ever been judged before anyone asked your story, you already know how fast a crowd can turn against the wrong person. Ruiz looked down at the burned Pentagon card again. "Lieutenant, maybe we should verify it officially." Danner stepped closer to her. "You are done questioning me." Then his radio crackled. "Dispatch to Lieutenant Danner. Incoming request from Federal Communications. They are asking for status confirmation at the residence." The entire porch went still again. Danner grabbed the radio too fast. "Negative. Local matter only." Naomi looked up slowly. "They found you faster than I expected." Danner ignored her. Sweat had started forming near his collar despite the cold night air. He pointed toward two officers. "Take the kid downstairs. Search every room." Marcus panicked instantly. "No." Naomi stepped between them without hesitation. "You do not touch him." One officer reached toward her arm. Ruiz stopped him quietly. "Wait." Danner exploded. "Why is everybody suddenly afraid of this woman?" Nobody answered. Then Ruiz's body cam emitted a sharp electronic tone. Her synced monitor lit automatically at her side. One line flashed across the screen before disappearing again. "Authorization request detected, priority clearance pending." Ruiz stared at it. Danner lunged immediately and shut the monitor off before anyone else could read more. But Naomi saw it. And so did Marcus. Danner looked directly into Naomi's eyes now. Not arrogant anymore. Nervous. "What exactly are you hiding in this house?" Naomi glanced toward the dark hallway where the secure phone sat silent again. Then she answered softly. "Not what?" "Who?" Just then, headlights turned onto the street. Black SUVs. No police markings. The black SUVs stopped at the end of Naomi Brooks's street, but nobody stepped out yet. Their headlights cut through the spinning police lights like silent warning signals. Every officer on the porch turned to look. Lieutenant Rick Danner forced a laugh that sounded too sharp. Federal contractors. Happens all the time. Nobody answered him. Naomi stood still beside the doorway, one hand protecting Marcus behind her. Her sweater sleeve had slipped slightly, revealing a faded scar running across her wrist. Ruiz noticed it. So did Danner. But Naomi calmly pulled the sleeve back down. Across the street, neighbors whispered harder now. Phones stayed raised. A teenager muttered, "Why would federal people come here for her?" Another answered immediately, "Maybe she stole military files." The rumor spread faster than truth ever could. Naomi heard every word. She did not defend herself. That silence made some people distrust her even more. Danner stepped closer until his badge almost touched her shoulder. "You see what you caused," he said quietly. "Whole neighborhood thinks you are dangerous." Naomi looked at the flashing lights reflecting across the wet pavement. "No," she answered softly. "They think I am poor." That line landed harder than shouting could have. Even Ruiz lowered her eyes for a second. Inside the house, Marcus watched from the staircase while holding Naomi's old notebook against his chest. He opened it slightly when nobody looked. Rows of dates. Coordinates. Names blacked out with marker. Military abbreviations written in perfect shorthand. Marcus frowned. He had lived with Naomi for 2 years and still did not fully know who she used to be. His phone buzzed suddenly. Unknown number. One message only. Keep the notebook safe. Marcus looked up immediately toward Naomi. Fear crossed his face. At the curb, officers began pushing neighbors farther back. The crowd resisted now, energized by gossip and live streams. She threatened cops. "No, she hacked the Pentagon. I heard she used to work overseas." Nobody knew anything. But everybody spoke like experts. That was the world Naomi had learned to survive in. A world where uniforms mattered more than truth. Ruiz quietly approached the police cruiser and reopened her body cam logs. The authorization warning flashed again for half a second before vanishing. She zoomed into the hidden system tag beneath it. Level 7 clearance request detected. Her expression changed instantly. Danner appeared behind her before she could read more. "Step away from that terminal." "Lieutenant, that is an order." Ruiz hesitated. Tiny hope. Tiny crack. Then another officer walked over nervously. "Sir, dispatch says Federal Communications called again." Danner snatched the radio. "Tell them local jurisdiction is handling it. They said it is not local anymore." Silence. Danner's jaw tightened visibly. Naomi watched him carefully now. Not afraid. Measuring him. He pointed toward her house again. "Search everything." "You already exceeded warrant scope," Naomi replied calmly. "You keep saying that like it scares me. It should scare your department." Ruiz looked sharply at Naomi after that line. Too precise again. Too controlled. Meanwhile, Marcus slowly descended the staircase carrying the notebook. One officer noticed immediately. "What is that?" Marcus froze. Naomi stepped forward fast. "Private property." Danner grabbed the notebook from Marcus before either of them could stop him. Pages bent under his hands. A folded photograph slipped out and landed face up on the floor. Ruiz picked it up automatically. A younger Naomi stood beside several military officials near an aircraft hangar. One face had been scratched out deliberately. Another wore a Pentagon insignia. Danner reached for the photo instantly. Old fake memorabilia. But Ruiz did not hand it over immediately. "Lieutenant, this photo is real stock paper." Naomi's voice stayed quiet. "Give it back." Danner finally ripped the photo from Ruiz's hand himself. "Enough." He shoved the notebook at another officer. Bag this. Marcus panicked. You cannot take that. Watch me. Naomi closed her eyes briefly. Old pain surfaced there. Not panic. Memory. Like she had already lived through powerful men taking things from her before. If dignity survives long enough under pressure, sometimes silence becomes stronger than anger. One elderly neighbor suddenly stepped forward from the crowd. Mrs. Holloway. Naomi's next-door neighbor for 11 years. That woman paid my rent last winter, she said shakily. She is not dangerous. Danner turned cold immediately. Ma'am, step behind the barrier. I know what kind of person she is. No, Danner snapped. You know what she pretended to be. The crowd leaned back toward him again. Authority was easier to trust than kindness. Then one of the SUV doors finally opened. Every officer on the street stiffened instinctively. A man in a dark coat stepped halfway out while speaking into an earpiece. He looked directly toward Naomi's house. Not toward Danner. Toward Naomi. Ruiz noticed it immediately. So did Danner. His confidence cracked for the first time. Before anyone could speak, dispatch suddenly blasted across every police radio at once. Lieutenant Danner, hold current operation immediately. Repeat, hold operation pending federal verification. The entire street went silent. Then Danner slowly looked down at the confiscated notebook in his hand. One page had fallen open by itself. At the top corner, stamped in faded ink, were 3 words that made the color drain from Ruiz's face. Strategic Operations Command. The street stayed locked in silence after the word Strategic Operations Command appeared on the notebook page. Officer Elena Ruiz stared at the faded stamp like her brain needed extra seconds to process it. Lieutenant Rick Danner reacted differently. He slammed the notebook shut immediately. Fake. Too fast. Too loud. Naomi Brooks watched him carefully from the porch steps. If it was fake, she said quietly, you would not be sweating. A few officers exchanged looks. Danner snapped toward them instantly. Everybody back to procedure. Sir, Ruiz said carefully, that classification is military restricted. And you are not military. Neither are you. Silence hit again. Sharp this time. The neighbors across the street leaned closer behind their phones. Marcus looked from Naomi to the black SUVs waiting at the curb. Aunt Naomi, he whispered nervously. Naomi placed one steady hand on his shoulder. Go inside. I am not leaving you alone. Danner laughed coldly. Kid finally figured out she is hiding something dangerous. Naomi's eyes lifted slowly toward him. Dangerous people usually arrive with 30 officers. That line traveled through the crowd instantly. A few phones lowered. Tiny shift. Tiny crack. Danner ignored it and marched toward the porch table where the burned Pentagon access card still rested beside the prescription bottles. He picked it up between 2 fingers like evidence from a crime scene. Expired. Damaged. Meaningless. Naomi's expression changed for the first time. Not fear. Precision. Do not bend the corner. Danner paused slightly. Why? Naomi answered immediately. Embedded chip. Ruiz looked up fast. Military encrypted cards use edge chips. Danner turned toward her sharply. Enough. But he had already stopped bending it. Another strange detail. Another exact answer Naomi should not have known. One of the officers near the SUVs suddenly spoke into his radio. Sir, federal frequency just overrode local dispatch. Danner stormed toward him. Give me that. While he argued into the radio, Ruiz quietly reopened her body cam diagnostics. Naomi noticed the screen reflection immediately. Your sync delay is wrong, she said softly. Ruiz blinked. What? Bodycam buffering should not exceed 6 seconds unless somebody manually interrupted upload. Ruiz stared at her. That was not public knowledge. Even Marcus looked confused now. Naomi realized she had said too much and stepped back into silence. But the damage was done. Ruiz reopened the upload logs. One red line flashed briefly before disappearing. Manual interruption detected her breathing slowed. She glanced toward Danner instinctively. Across the street, Mrs. Holloway stepped closer to another neighbor. I told you that woman was not ordinary. Then why does she live like this? Maybe because people like us do not ask the right questions. Inside the house, Marcus carefully picked up the old photograph that had fallen earlier. He studied the scratched-out face again. Then his eyes widened slightly. One corner of the photo showed the same insignia stamped inside Naomi's notebook. Strategic Operations Command. Tiny clue. Tiny connection. Outside, Danner returned angrier than before. Federal review delayed, he barked loudly for the crowd to hear. Which means local authority continues. He pointed directly at Naomi. You obstructed an active investigation. No, Naomi answered calmly. You expanded one illegally. You think legal words protect you? No. Records do. That answer landed hard. Even the officers went quiet. Ruiz stepped forward carefully. Lieutenant, maybe we should verify chain of command before continuing. Danner cut her off instantly. You questioning my authority in public? I am questioning missing footage. Wrong thing to say. Danner's face darkened immediately. Everybody heard that, he shouted toward the crowd. Now officers are getting manipulated too. Phones lifted again. Social pressure shifted back toward him. Authority was loud. Truth was patient. One young officer near the doorway suddenly noticed Naomi staring at the patrol car computer screen from 20 feet away. How did she read that? He muttered quietly. The screen reflection was barely visible through the windshield. Naomi heard him. Your incident report has the wrong statute code, she said without moving. Complete silence. Ruiz slowly looked toward the screen. Then down at her own tablet. Same code. Wrong code. Danner exploded immediately. Coincidence. Naomi met his eyes directly now. No. Carelessness. The tension changed after that. Not solved. Not safe. But different. Like the room before lightning strikes. Then one of the SUV doors finally opened wider. A gray-haired man in a dark federal coat stepped halfway onto the pavement while studying a tablet. He spoke quietly into an earpiece, never looking at Danner once. Only at Naomi. Ruiz noticed his posture immediately. Respect. Not suspicion. Danner saw it too. Panic flickered across his face for half a second before disappearing again. He turned suddenly toward two officers. Confiscate every device in that house. Marcus stepped backward instinctively. Naomi moved in front of him immediately. You do not touch my family. Then hand over the notebook. Naomi stayed silent. Danner smiled coldly. There it is. Finally scared. But before anyone moved, Ruiz's patrol tablet emitted a loud warning tone. The incident file reopened by itself. A new line slowly appeared across the screen while every nearby officer stared. Priority identity verification request, accessing restricted personnel. Record the name beneath it began loading one letter at a time before freezing halfway open. The frozen personnel record stayed glowing on Ruiz's patrol tablet while the entire street held its breath. Half a name loaded. Then the screen locked itself automatically. Access restricted. Lieutenant Rick Danner reacted instantly. He grabbed the tablet from Ruiz's hand so hard it nearly hit the pavement. Nobody touches department systems without authorization. Ruiz stared at him. The system opened itself. And now it is closed. He turned toward the officers around him. Bodycams off unless I say otherwise. Naomi Brooks finally moved again. One careful step down from the porch. You just violated evidence preservation procedure. Danner laughed loudly for the crowd this time. Listen to her. Suddenly she is a lawyer too. A few neighbors laughed nervously with him. Phones lifted again. Authority was reclaiming the room. Naomi stayed calm. You ordered officers to disable active recordings during an open search. Danner stepped close. Ruiz did not answer immediately after Naomi Brooks warned her about the edited bodycam upload. She simply stared at Lieutenant Rick Danner. Long enough for everyone nearby to notice. Danner saw the hesitation and stepped forward fast. Hand me the tablet. Ruiz tightened her grip slightly instead. Tiny movement. Tiny rebellion. Sir, she said carefully, department policy requires preservation review if footage was altered. Danner's jaw flexed hard. You accusing me of tampering? Naomi answered before Ruiz could. The street finally emptied after midnight, but Naomi Brooks still sat awake at her kitchen table with the old photograph spread beside a stack of unpaid bills. The apartment was silent except for the humming refrigerator and the distant sound of rain against the fire escape outside. Marcus slept on the couch nearby, wrapped in a faded military blanket that smelled faintly like smoke and old cedar. Naomi stared at the Pentagon access card resting beside her chipped coffee mug. The edges were burned black now. Worn from years hidden away. Years buried on purpose. Her fingers trembled slightly before she turned the card face down again. Not fear. Memory. The television in the corner replayed edited clips from the standoff outside her home. Reporters called her the woman at the center of a federal dispute. Some channels called her unstable. Others called her dangerous. None of them used her name correctly. Naomi muted the television instantly. She could still hear Lieutenant Rick Danner's voice anyway. People like you always hide behind stories. Marcus shifted on the couch. Aunt Naomi. She looked over softly. You should sleep. Are they coming back? Naomi did not answer immediately. That silence said enough. Marcus slowly sat up and held the old photograph again. The image showed Naomi years younger beside several uniformed officials outside a desert operations center. Most faces were blurred by smoke damage except one man standing beside her. A high-ranking defense officer. Who was he? Marcus asked quietly. Naomi's eyes lowered. Someone who taught me what power does when fear gets inside it. Another silence. Then Marcus noticed her hand tightening around the edge of the table. You knew this would happen someday. Naomi gave a tired smile that never fully formed. No. I hoped people had changed. Emotional pain moved across her face for only a second before she buried it again. On the table sat a worn notebook held together with tape. Naomi opened it carefully. Inside were handwritten dates, operation codes, names, procedural notes, and one phrase underlined 3 times in faded ink: chain of authority cannot be overridden by local command. Marcus frowned. That sounds military. Naomi closed the notebook immediately. It sounds like rules people stop following when they think nobody important is watching. Her phone buzzed suddenly. Unknown number. She ignored it. It buzzed again instantly. Then a text arrived. Turn over the photo before this gets worse. Marcus saw it too. That is him, right? Naomi locked the screen without answering. Outside her apartment window, headlights slowed briefly near the building before driving off again. Pressure never really left. It just changed shape. Naomi stood and quietly walked toward the hallway closet. Hidden behind old coats hung a faded dress uniform sealed carefully inside protective plastic. Marcus had never seen it before. Neither had anyone else in years. Naomi stared at it without touching it. Pain crossed her eyes harder this time. Not pride. Loss. Why did you stop wearing it? Marcus asked from behind her. Naomi swallowed slowly. Because one mission cost people I loved. The room went still. She reached into the closet pocket and removed a folded letter instead. The paper had been opened so many times the edges were nearly white. Marcus noticed one signature near the bottom instantly matched the initials from the Pentagon access request earlier that night. N.B. That is your signature, Marcus whispered. Naomi folded the letter shut before he could read more. Some names become heavier than uniforms. A knock suddenly echoed through the apartment door downstairs. Loud. Sharp. Naomi froze. Another knock followed immediately. Police department, a voice shouted. We need to ask more questions. Marcus looked terrified now. Naomi calmly slid the notebook, photograph, and letter back into an old metal lockbox beneath the sink. Her movements were practiced. Careful. Like someone who had hidden dangerous truths before. Do not open the door unless I tell you, she said quietly. Naomi, Marcus whispered. Did you really outrank the mayor? She looked at him for a long moment. Then she answered softly, that was never supposed to matter. The knocking downstairs grew louder. A neighbor's voice drifted through the hallway nervously. Somebody was recording again. Somebody always was now. Naomi grabbed her coat and stepped toward the door just as her phone rang again. This time the caller ID displayed one word only, Pentagon. She stared at it without moving. Marcus looked between the phone and the lockbox under the sink. Then his eyes widened slightly. One corner of the old photograph still stuck out beneath the metal lid. In the background of the picture, barely visible under smoke damage, stood Lieutenant Rick Danner himself. Younger. Nervous. Saluting Naomi Brooks. The police station lobby felt colder than before. Not because of the air conditioning. Because now everybody was watching Naomi Brooks like she had already been convicted. Two local reporters stood near the front desk. Phones were raised again. Officers whispered beside the coffee machine. Somebody had leaked another edited clip online. In this version, Naomi looked aggressive. Unstable. Dangerous. Lieutenant Rick Danner walked through the center of the lobby like he owned the building. Uniform sharp. Jaw tight. Confidence fully restored. There she is, he said loudly. The woman pretending federal authority. Several officers laughed under their breath. Naomi stood near the holding desk without reacting. Her old coat still carried rainwater from outside. Marcus sat quietly beside her, clutching the damaged photograph inside his backpack. Danner pointed directly at Naomi. You lied to Federal Dispatch. No, Naomi answered calmly. I spoke carefully. Danner smirked. Same thing when people like you get cornered. Emotional silence spread across the room again. An older desk sergeant looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Naomi noticed the bodycam charging station behind the desk. One unit blinked red instead of blue. Missing footage. Her eyes stopped there for 1 second too long. Danner noticed. Still chasing fairy tales, he asked sharply. That footage is corrupted. Naomi spoke quietly. Corrupted files do not trigger manual override warnings. A young officer near the computer froze slightly. Danner turned immediately. Ignore her. The officer hesitated. Sir, the system actually did flag a restricted archive request earlier. Danner's voice hardened instantly. Then clear it. The officer swallowed and obeyed. Public pressure tightened again. Phones lifted higher. Naomi could feel the room shifting against her. A woman near the waiting area whispered loudly enough to hear, "Why would the Pentagon care about her?" Another answered, "Maybe she hacked something." Danner stepped closer now. "You hear that? Nobody believes you." Naomi met his eyes without blinking. "You are working very hard to make sure of that." That line landed harder than anyone expected. Even the reporters stopped typing for a second. Tiny hope entered the room. Then Danner crushed it immediately. "Escort her out," he ordered. Two officers moved forward. Marcus stood up fast. "She did nothing wrong." Danner barely looked at him. "Sit down, kid." Marcus did not move. One officer softened slightly. "Lieutenant, maybe we should wait for federal confirmation first." Danner snapped back instantly. "There is no confirmation coming." Then he made a mistake. Small. Fast. But deadly. The Pentagon buried this years ago. Silence. Naomi's eyes lifted slowly. So did the desk sergeant's. Danner realized what he had said half a second too late. "What did you mean by this?" Naomi asked quietly. Danner recovered fast. "I mean whatever story she invented." But the crack had already formed. The young officer at the computer glanced nervously at the restricted archive warning still flashing faintly on the corner of the monitor before Danner slammed the screen downward. "Enough," Danner barked. "This woman trespassed on an active police operation. She interfered with officers. She will leave now." "You surrounded her house with 30 officers," the desk sergeant muttered under his breath. Danner shot him a glare so sharp the man immediately looked away. False victory settled across the lobby again. The crowd shifted back toward Danner's authority. Reporters nodded. Security moved closer to Naomi. Marcus tightened his grip on the backpack. Naomi remained calm, but her hands trembled slightly now. Not fear. Exhaustion. One reporter stepped forward carefully. "Ma'am, are you claiming military status?" Naomi answered softly, "I am claiming the truth matters." Danner laughed openly this time. "Truth?" He spread his arms toward the crowd. "Look around. Nobody here sees a hero. They see a woman hiding behind old stories and fake credentials." Several people avoided Naomi's eyes after that. Even the officer who doubted Danner stepped back. The pressure became crushing now. Public. Final. Deliberate. Danner pointed toward the exit doors. "Get her out of my station." An officer reached carefully for Naomi's arm. At that exact moment, the restricted archive terminal behind the desk emitted a loud warning tone. Every head turned instantly. The locked screen flashed red. Access reconnected. Then one partial line appeared before the monitor froze again. Authorization history, command level, and brew. The room went still. Danner's face lost color for the first time. And across the lobby, the desk sergeant slowly looked from the screen, to Naomi Brooks. The red warning light still pulsed across the archive monitor when Lieutenant Rick Danner slammed his hand against the desk hard enough to shake the keyboard. "Shut it down," he barked. "Now." The young officer at the terminal hesitated. "Sir, the system already reconnected to Federal, I gave you an order." The officer obeyed. The screen went black instantly. The room exhaled in nervous silence. Naomi Brooks stood motionless beside Marcus while every eye in the station shifted between her face and the dead monitor. For one dangerous second, doubt had entered the building. Danner could not allow it to stay. He straightened his uniform slowly, regaining control one breath at a time. "Everybody calm down," he announced loudly. "This is exactly how manipulation works." He pointed directly at Naomi again. "Restricted systems can be spoofed." Reporters immediately began typing again. Phones lifted back upward. The pressure turned against Naomi once more. Danner stepped closer, voice sharp enough to cut through the entire lobby. You used stolen credentials. No, Naomi answered quietly. Then prove it. She said nothing. Marcus gripped the backpack tighter. Danner noticed immediately. His eyes narrowed. What is in the bag? Marcus froze. Naomi spoke calmly. Personal property. Danner laughed coldly. Funny how every liar suddenly has personal property when evidence appears. He reached for the backpack himself. Marcus pulled back instinctively. Several officers moved forward at once. The crowd reacted immediately. Whispering. Recording. Watching. Naomi's voice remained steady. Do not touch him. Danner turned toward the room dramatically. You hear that? Threats now. That was not a threat, Naomi replied. That was a boundary. Emotional silence hit harder this time. Even one reporter lowered her phone briefly. Tiny hope surfaced again when the older desk sergeant finally stepped forward. Lieutenant, maybe legal should review this before we continue. Danner snapped without hesitation. You want legal involved because a woman with a burned photograph made you nervous? The sergeant fell quiet again. False confidence spread back across Danner's face. He sensed the room slipping toward him once more. Enough games, he announced. Naomi Brooks is being detained for obstruction and interference with active police operations. Marcus stood instantly. She did nothing wrong. Danner ignored him completely. Cuff her. Two officers approached slowly now. Neither looked comfortable. Naomi did not resist. She simply removed her coat carefully and handed it to Marcus first. Inside the pocket, the old Pentagon access card slipped halfway into view before Marcus quickly hid it again. One officer noticed. His expression changed slightly. Danner noticed that too. Focus, he warned sharply. Metal cuffs clicked around Naomi's wrists. Phones recorded every second. Somebody near the doorway whispered, so she really was lying. Another answered quietly, I knew it. Naomi lowered her eyes for the first time all night. Not in shame. In exhaustion. Danner leaned closer so only she could hear. You should have stayed forgotten. Naomi looked up slowly. You sound afraid for someone who already won. His jaw tightened instantly. Then another sound interrupted the room. A soft notification tone from the archive terminal. The screen had turned back on by itself. One frame appeared before freezing again. Grainy body cam footage. Desert uniforms. Smoke. And one younger officer standing rigidly at attention before someone just outside the camera frame. The visible timestamp matched the year from Naomi's photograph. The room stared silently. Danner moved fast and ripped the cable from the terminal. Corrupted footage, he snapped immediately. Ignore it. But his voice cracked this time. Small. Brief. Human. The older desk sergeant looked carefully at the frozen frame again. Lieutenant, he whispered slowly. Is that you? Danner turned cold instantly. Escort the detainee downstairs. The officers obeyed. Naomi was pulled toward the secured hallway while Marcus shouted her name behind her. The backpack slipped partially open during the movement. The burned photograph slid across the floor. It stopped directly at the shoes of the desk sergeant. He bent down carefully. Looked closer. His face changed. In the corner of the photo, barely visible beneath smoke damage and faded ink, stood a younger Rick Danner saluting someone whose face had been torn away. Then the front entrance doors suddenly burst open. A deep voice thundered across the station. Stop right there. Every officer in the lobby froze. The entire police station froze at the sound of the voice. Officers stopped moving. Reporters lowered their phones halfway. Even the buzzing fluorescent lights suddenly felt louder than the room itself. A tall man in a dark federal overcoat stepped through the entrance beside two uniformed military police officers. Rainwater dripped from their shoulders onto the station floor. The older desk sergeant straightened instinctively. Lieutenant Rick Danner did not. Not immediately. Who authorized this interruption? Danner demanded sharply. The man ignored him completely and looked straight toward Naomi Brooks standing in handcuffs near the secured hallway. His expression changed the moment he saw her wrists. "Remove those cuffs," he said quietly. Nobody moved. Danner stepped forward fast. "This woman is under local investigation." The federal officer finally turned toward him. "Calm. Controlled. Dangerous. Name and badge number." Danner hesitated for the first time all night. "Lieutenant Rick Danner." The classified file opened fully across the archive monitor. Every officer in the station stared at the glowing screen while the recovered bodycam footage continued playing silently beside it. Smoke rolled through a desert command post. Younger soldiers moved frantically in the background. Then the camera shifted. The entire lobby stopped breathing. Naomi Brooks stepped into frame wearing a Pentagon Strategic Command uniform. Calm. Focused. Giving orders while explosions echoed nearby. And directly in front of her stood a younger Rick Danner at rigid attention. Saluting her. Phones lowered across the station one by one. Nobody laughed anymore. The federal officer spoke clearly into the silence. Naomi Brooks. Former Pentagon Strategic Operations Commander. Emotional shock hit the room all at once. The older desk sergeant slowly removed his glasses. One reporter whispered, "Oh my God." Marcus stared at Naomi like he was seeing her for the first time. Danner tried to interrupt instantly. "That footage is classified." "It does not prove, it proves you knew exactly who she was," the federal officer cut in sharply. Another screen opened beside the bodycam footage. Official authorization records. Naomi's name. Command clearance level. Emergency Civilian Protection Authority. Signed federal directives. Every line confirmed by Pentagon authentication seals. Danner's face lost all remaining color. Naomi remained silent. Her wrists still cuffed. That image alone changed the entire room. The federal officer turned slowly toward the officers holding her. "Remove them." This time nobody hesitated. The cuffs came off immediately. Naomi rubbed her wrists quietly but said nothing. Not triumph. Not revenge. Just exhaustion. Danner stepped forward desperately. She disappeared after the Black Ridge operation. Nobody knew if she still held clearance. "You filed the closure report yourself," the federal officer answered coldly. "And omitted her surviving authority status." Another emotional wave hit the station. The desk sergeant looked horrified now. "You buried her records." Danner's voice cracked. "I followed orders." Naomi finally spoke. Soft. Controlled. Deadly calm. "No. You followed fear." Silence. Pure silence. The federal agent connected another recovered archive file. This time audio played through the station speakers. Younger Danner's voice filled the room from years ago. "Commander Brooks saved the entire evacuation line." Then another voice answered. "Recommend immediate commendation." The recording stopped. Nobody moved. Marcus looked down at the burned photograph again. Suddenly the missing torn section made sense. Naomi had removed herself from it on purpose. One reporter slowly lowered her camera completely. "She hid her own medals," she whispered. The federal officer nodded once. After the operation, Commander Brooks requested full civilian withdrawal status. She disappeared from public service voluntarily. Danner tried one final time. You do not understand what happened over there. Naomi looked directly at him now. First time all night. I understand exactly what happened. I carried your survivors out myself. The room shattered emotionally after that sentence. Even officers who supported Danner stepped backward instinctively. The power inside the station had completely reversed now. The body cam footage continued running in the background. Naomi commanding evacuations. Naomi carrying injured soldiers. Naomi giving direct federal orders while alarms screamed around her. Danner stood inside every frame following her commands. The same man who called her a liar hours earlier. You targeted her house knowing who she was, the desk sergeant said slowly. Danner said nothing. You used 30 officers against a federal command officer, the federal agent added. And falsified obstruction reports afterward. Danner looked trapped now. Cornered by his own history. Naomi still refused to humiliate him. She only picked up the old photograph gently from Marcus's hands. Her thumb brushed across the burned edge where her younger face used to be. I did not come here for revenge, she said quietly. I came because my nephew deserved safety. That line silenced the room harder than the reveal itself. The federal officer turned toward Danner. Lieutenant Rick Danner, he said coldly, did you knowingly suppress classified federal identification during an active civilian escalation? Danner opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Then another voice echoed from the station entrance behind him. Step away from your badge. Everyone turned. Internal Affairs officers were already walking into the building. Internal Affairs officers crossed the station floor slowly while every phone camera stayed locked on Lieutenant Rick Danner. Nobody spoke now. The same officers who laughed beside him earlier suddenly stepped backward as if his uniform carried fire. One Internal Affairs captain stopped directly in front of him. Badge, she said coldly. Danner swallowed hard. This is political. Badge, she repeated. His trembling hand finally unclipped it. The metallic sound against the evidence table echoed through the silent station harder than shouting ever could. Naomi stood quietly near Marcus, still holding the burned photograph against her chest. She did not smile. She did not celebrate. She only watched like someone exhausted by years of carrying weight nobody else saw. The federal officer placed Danner's badge beside the recovered bodycam drive. Symbol beside symbol. Authority beside truth. Lieutenant Rick Danner, he announced publicly, you are suspended pending federal obstruction charges, evidence suppression, unlawful escalation of force, and falsification of civilian threat reports. Gasps spread softly through the station. One young officer lowered his eyes immediately. Another quietly removed the viral live stream from his phone. Danner tried one last desperate defense. You do not understand what pressure command gave us after Black Ridge. Naomi answered before anyone else could. Pressure does not erase conscience. Silence again. Sharp. Heavy. The Internal Affairs captain opened another recovered file from the Pentagon archive. This time the station saw signed requests Naomi had submitted years earlier. Civilian relocation papers. Mental health evaluations. Letters declining medals and promotions. One handwritten sentence stopped several officers cold. I request anonymity so my family can live without retaliation. Marcus stared at the screen slowly. You disappeared to protect us. Naomi nodded once. Very small. Your mother already lost enough. The emotional shift inside the room deepened. Earlier, Naomi had been treated like a threat. Now people looked at her like someone the system failed on purpose. The older desk sergeant stepped forward awkwardly. Commander Brooks, Naomi interrupted gently. Naomi is fine. He looked ashamed. We should have listened. Nearby, one officer quietly removed the temporary trespass paperwork they forced Marcus to sign earlier. Another deleted false incident tags from the system while everyone watched. Every correction felt public now. Visible. Real. Danner looked around desperately for support. None came. "You are all turning on me because of old footage," he snapped weakly. The federal officer stepped closer. "No. Because you knew she outranked every person in this building and still sent 30 officers to terrorize her family." That sentence shattered whatever authority Danner still had left. Naomi finally walked toward the evidence table. She picked up the old body cam carefully. Burn marks still scarred the edges. "This should never have survived," Danner muttered under his breath. Naomi looked at him calmly. "Truth survives longer than fear." Several officers lowered their heads after hearing that. Marcus moved beside his aunt quietly. For the first time all night, he no longer looked terrified. He looked proud. Then the police chief himself entered the station. No sirens. No announcement. Just heavy silence following him through the crowd. Every officer straightened instantly. The chief looked first at Naomi. Then at Danner's badge on the table. Then at the federal files glowing across the monitors. "Is it true?" he asked softly. The federal officer handed him the archive confirmation. The chief read silently for several seconds before exhaling deeply. "Jesus Christ." He turned toward Naomi directly. "Commander Brooks, this department owes you an apology." Naomi answered with quiet dignity. "Your department owes protection to people without power too." That line hit harder than any accusation. Even the reporters stopped typing for a second. The chief nodded slowly. "You are right." Then he faced the room. Effective immediately, all charges, warrants, and incident reports against Naomi Brooks and Marcus Hill are voided and permanently removed. Another officer began correcting the system records in real time. Naomi's name finally appeared clean across the station monitor. No threat marker. No escalation warning. Just her real name. Marcus looked at the screen like he could barely believe it existed. The federal officer returned something carefully to Naomi then. Her old Pentagon identification card. Burned at the edges. Preserved for years. Naomi stared at it silently before taking it with shaking fingers. Not because of power. Because of memory. Because of everything it cost her. Near the station entrance, a nervous young black woman stood clutching a complaint form against another officer. Earlier she almost walked away. Now she stared at Naomi with visible hope in her eyes. Naomi noticed immediately. The police chief noticed too. "Commander Brooks," he said carefully, "there are people here who may finally trust this station again because of what happened tonight." Naomi looked at the frightened woman. Then at the open hallway leading deeper into the station. And for the first time since the raid began, she hesitated not from fear, but from the possibility that her silence might finally end. The next morning, sunlight spilled softly across the front steps of the police station that had nearly destroyed Naomi Brooks the night before. The yellow barricades were gone now. News vans remained at a distance, but nobody shouted questions anymore. Even the reporters spoke quietly. Inside the lobby, workers removed Lieutenant Danner's nameplate from the command wall while officers watched in silence. Naomi stood near the reception desk holding the same burned Pentagon identification card in one hand and the old photograph in the other. For the first time in years, she no longer hid either one. Marcus leaned beside her, exhausted but smiling faintly. "You finally slept?" he asked softly. Naomi almost laughed. "For 2 hours. That is still progress. Small. Human. Real." Near the entrance, the young black woman from the night before hesitated again with her complaint form trembling in her hands. This time she did not turn around. The police chief stepped forward personally and opened the interview room door for her himself. "You will be heard," he said quietly. Naomi noticed the woman glance at her with nervous gratitude before disappearing inside. That single moment mattered more to Naomi than cameras ever could. Nearby, one officer approached slowly carrying something wrapped in cloth. It was Naomi's old service badge. Restored overnight by the department archive team after years in storage. The edges still carried scratches from Black Ridge. The officer looked ashamed. This should have been returned a long time ago. Naomi accepted it carefully. Not like a trophy. Like a scar finally acknowledged. "Thank you," she answered gently. Several younger officers nearby lowered their eyes. One of them finally stepped forward. "Commander Brooks, my mother watched the live stream." He swallowed hard. "She said if officers treated you that way, then people like her never stood a chance." Naomi looked at him for a long second before replying quietly. "Then change what happens next." That line settled through the lobby deeper than applause ever could. Upstairs, federal investigators continued carrying evidence boxes from Danner's office. Nobody stopped them anymore. Nobody defended him anymore. Through the hallway window, Danner himself sat alone at a metal table signing suspension documents with shaking hands while lawyers stood nearby. He looked smaller now. Not powerless. Just stripped of the arrogance that once protected him. Naomi never walked over to him. She did not need revenge to feel restored. The police chief approached again holding a thin folder. "The city council approved emergency funding this morning," he explained. "Community protection training. Bias response reform. Anonymous civilian reporting." Naomi looked surprised. "That fast?" "People watched what happened here," he admitted quietly. "They cannot unsee it." He handed her the folder. On the front page, one line had already been typed. "The Naomi Brooks Initiative for Civilian Dignity and Ethical Response." Marcus stared at the title. "They named it after you." Naomi exhaled slowly, emotional for the first time. "Then it cannot become another empty promise." "It will not," the chief answered. Nearby, the old desk sergeant carefully rehung Naomi's corrected personnel photograph onto the station recognition wall beside decorated officers who once outranked her publicly. No ceremony. No speech. Just quiet correction. Quiet dignity. A little boy waiting beside his grandmother near the lobby chairs looked up at Naomi curiously. "Are you the lady from the video?" he asked. Several adults froze awkwardly. Naomi knelt gently to his height. "I am." The child studied her old badge carefully. "You still helped people after they were mean to you?" Naomi smiled softly. "Tired. Honest. Somebody has to go first." The grandmother wiped tears from her eyes after hearing that. As the morning crowd slowly cleared, Marcus walked beside Naomi toward the station doors. He glanced once more at the massive building that had humiliated them both publicly less than 24 hours earlier. "You could leave all this behind now," he said quietly. Naomi looked back through the glass lobby. Officers were speaking more carefully. Civilians were being listened to. The frightened young woman from earlier was now sitting with an advocate instead of alone. Small changes. Fragile changes. But real. Naomi slipped the restored badge into her jacket pocket beside the old photograph. "Maybe," she answered softly. "Or maybe this is where healing starts." Together they stepped outside into the bright morning air. No sirens. No shouting. No cameras chasing them anymore. Just sunlight across the concrete and strangers quietly moving aside with respect as Naomi Brooks walked past them with her head held high. And somewhere behind her, inside the station that once tried to erase her, another frightened voice was finally being heard.